Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to today's program, which we have entitled Designing HR Audit Frameworks. I am your presenter, Andrew Ondari. Talking of HR Audit Framework reminds us of the definition that we gave to HR audit as a systematic process of evaluating, reviewing, or assessing HR policies, procedures, and systems. To give structure to the process of HR audit, we talk about audit framework. Therefore, an audit framework is a structured way of conducting the HR audits in our organizations. This framework or structure helps us in planning, implementing, and reviewing the HR audits that we will be conducting from time to time. So these frameworks are basically models that HR managers use in conducting HR audits from beginning to end, and ensures that the process is systematic and that it is predictable. Without predictability, there is a danger of producing different results at different times because there is no structure. Structure also gives us consistency in the way we do things. So anytime we conduct a HR audit, we want to be consistent in the way we plan, in the way we create processes, and in the way we present our final findings and recommendations. So having said that, I want us to move to the content of our topic today. Those are the key contents of the design of HR audit frameworks. So the first area that we shall be covering is the concept of framework and its importance. What do we mean by a framework? And how does it work? Secondly, we shall look at types of HR audit frameworks. There are quite a number of them that we shall be discussing, starting with the compliance framework, risk framework, functional framework, as well as best practice framework. After that, we shall look at the key elements of HR audit framework, that when you are designing this HR model or framework, what could be contained in this framework, starting with determining the objectives of the audit, and then establishing the standards or parameters that we shall be using in the evaluation of the various functions. The other aspect we shall discuss are the steps that are involved in designing an effective framework. As we have indicated before, HR audit is systematic. And even in this framework design, we look at the step-by-step process of designing it so that we are orderly in the way we do things, that is, we are organized, and that our results are based on facts, because we already have a structure in which we are going to conduct this audit, including data collection, data analysis, and presentation of the final report. Then after that, we shall look at the characteristics of an effective or successful audit framework. There are quite a number of them, one of which is consistency. That if the framework is not consistent, then we are likely to have different results, which again may distort the facts that we are trying to present. Second last is how to make HR audits flexible and scalable. We are referring to the frameworks. There are many, and we need to make them flexible. Flexible by way of adapting to the changes in the environment. Because as one philosopher said, Karl Marx, everything in the world changes except change. So even our frameworks may have to change from time to time. And that is why we need to make them flexible. And lastly, what are the success factors for implementation of this framework? There are quite a number of factors that affect effective implementation of this model. One of which is leadership commitment. The other one is resistance to change. Another one is integration of technology, because there are very many technologies that are available, and how do we integrate these frameworks to the existing technologies? In some cases, there might be conflicts, which we should be aware of. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, these are the 7 elements or aspects we are going to discuss in this topic. So by way of introduction, let me say that designing HR audit framework involves a step-by-step approach in assessing the HR policies, procedures, and systems. All these are aspects that we are going to assess or use in evaluating the various HR functions like recruitment. What is the policy like? What are the procedures in recruitment? What are the systems involved in recruitment? And what are the practices or internal and external standards that we use in evaluating the functions that we intend to assess? So step by step means that there is a procedure or a systematic way of doing it. So in designing this framework, we need to follow a step-by-step process so that we are systematic and that we are predictable in the way we conduct this process. I've indicated that these frameworks provide a blueprint for identifying strengths, pinpointing gaps, and mitigating risks. This blueprint is basically a model, and this model can be used by anybody, anywhere, because it becomes a standard tool for conducting HR audits. And because it's a blueprint, it should be followed by everybody who is involved in this process. And that is why I've said in the last bullet that it is a guide that helps us to collect, analyze, and present data in our audit so that we identify gaps, strengths, and also reduce the risks that may arise in non-compliance of our activities. So this guide is fairly broad and detailed because we don't want to leave anything to chance. The moment we leave out anything, we run the risk of not capturing all the areas that we intend to capture. So 3 things are coming out from this introduction: that it is a step-by-step process, which is systematic. 2, it is a blueprint, that it is a model that anybody can use. And lastly, it is a guide in collecting, analyzing, and interpreting data that we shall have collected in the audit. Allow me to talk about the concept of framework and its importance. A framework is a structured model to organize complex activities. This model, as I have indicated, is a guide that helps us to conduct the HR audit. This HR audit is not as simple as it may seem. It is complex. Why is it complex? Because it will involve different stakeholders. 2, it will involve the use of different tools and methodologies in collecting and analyzing data. 3, it is complex because we need to align it to the corporate goals and objectives. And lastly, it is also complex because it may involve a culture and mindset change. That the mindset of the traditional audits is to identify mistakes or errors. And that's why the traditional audits could produce either a qualified or an unqualified report, where a qualified report captures all the mistakes, errors, or problems that may arise. And unqualified report gives a clean bill of health that all the aspects in the HR audit have been complied. So the mindset has to change from the traditional way of finding mistakes to a more collaborative and fact-finding mission with a view to improving. It's not like a traffic police officer who is always looking for mistakes in your car. We are not here to look for mistakes, but we are here to identify gaps and also weaknesses with a view to correcting them or improving them. So basically, a HR audit framework will help to create structure or order in the way we shall be conducting the HR audit. Secondly, the framework defines the key elements, processes, and relationships among the different parts of the HR audit. So elements are areas that could be covered in the HR framework. There are quite a number of elements or aspects that are covered in the framework, including objectives, standards or criteria for measurement, data collection, presentation of findings, and the monitoring and evaluation. So those are some of the elements contained in a framework. Secondly, the process. That when we are conducting the HR audit, we should start with planning. Then after planning, we assemble the team that is going to conduct the audit. Then after assembling the team, we assign responsibilities to the team. Then after that, we collect data, analyze it, and prepare a report. So the process, again, gives structure to the process of HR audit. And then relationships. These are interactions between different variables and the people involved. So we need to create a relationship between HR department and other departments to make this process a success. Without this relationship, there will be resistance or unwillingness to make any meaningful contribution by other departments. So what do? We need to engage them from the very beginning so that they are on board and that we work together as a team. Thirdly, the framework ensures consistency, clarity, and systematic execution of the tasks. Consistency, as it were, is the ability of the model or the process of HR audit to be predictable. That if the process is not predictable, then there is an element of disorder. HR managers are by their own nature orderly people or organized. So consistency that results from this framework shows the level of orderliness that we use in the execution of our mandate as HR managers. Talking of clarity, this has to do with the language that we use in making our presentations to the various stakeholders, particularly the senior managers to whom we are responsible or accountable. The language that we use in any framework, including HR audit framework, should be simple and understandable so that there is no element of doubt in what we are presenting. So a good framework is one that is clear in terms of two things. One, the structure that we are going to follow in conducting the audit. And two, the language that we use in presenting the findings. And then systematic, that this framework is a step-by-step process. So we don't want to cause confusion. And that is why it is by nature systematic. In HR audits, this framework guides planning, execution, and follow-up. I will be demonstrating what goes into planning. that in planning, we establish objectives, we assemble resources, we determine the criteria for evaluation or audit, and we also establish the structure of the audit team. Without planning, then, as it were, we are planning to fail. Because planning helps us to focus into the future in terms of what is likely to happen, how, where, and by whom. On execution, this is about implementation. When we are implementing anything, be it a project or a HR audit, there are three things that come to our minds. One is the financial resources, allocation of resources. Number two, assigning of duties and responsibilities. And number three, monitoring and evaluation. That if you are implementing a HR audit, those three things come to mind. I will repeat. One is resource allocation. Two, assignment of duties. And three, monitoring and evaluation. So execution does not come by accident. It is a planned process where managers make deliberate efforts to allocate resources, assign people duties, and monitor progress. And then on follow-up is to ensure that everything that has been planned or has been implemented is being implemented in the right way, at the right time, and by the right people. Why follow-up? To identify the level of implementation. Two, to identify any gaps. Three, to identify emerging issues. And four, possible solutions to the gaps and emerging issues. Lastly, on the concept of HR audit framework is its importance. What does it do? It serves as a roadmap. This roadmap shows the direction in which we are moving from point A to point B. So point A is the start of the audit process, and the last point is the one on monitoring and evaluation to ensure continuity. That this process, once started, does not come to an end. So there is a roadmap of the milestones that we are going to achieve, at what time, and how we are going to achieve those milestones. It also serves as a tool of compliance. Compliance is about adherence to three key aspects. One, the labor laws. Two, our own internal policies. And three, industry standards. I want to believe that we all come from different backgrounds in terms of industries. Some of us may be in manufacturing, others may be in service industry. So if you are in manufacturing, there are certain compliance standards that you may have to adhere to, so as to ensure that you produce the goods that are of high quality to satisfy your customers. So compliance is important. And this framework helps in identifying weaknesses or gaps in the various types of audits so that we take corrective measures. Where we are non-compliant, we make sure that our policies, our processes, and our systems are compliant. And lastly, it serves as a tool for continuous improvement. Improvement is about enhancing the policies, the practices, and systems, including our culture. So to improve is to enhance or make something better. So this framework is going to make our activities and processes related to recruitment and selection, training and development, performance management, health and safety, and employee relations. So those are the areas we are going to improve once an effective audit has been done. So the framework, which we have called a model or a structure, is going to ensure that we improve all those functional areas in which we are accountable. So that is the concept of HR audit framework and its importance. Next are the key elements of an audit framework. There are quite a number of them. In the next slide, I will show more. The first one is audit objectives. That this identifies the specific objectives that we are going to achieve at the end of the audit process. Allow me to give an example of the different types of audits that we shall be conducting and possibly give one or two objectives. Starting with compliance audit. That in compliance, we are going to assess or evaluate the level to which our policies, our procedures, and the systems are in compliance with the labor laws or industry standards. So when we set out to conduct a compliance audit, the objective is to ensure HR policies are in compliance with the Employment Act. Just an example. Ensure HR policies are in compliance with the Employment Act. So that becomes our objective when we are doing a compliance audit. So the framework we are going to use is that the first thing we identify is the objectives. Another aspect is training and development. We want to ensure that we equip our employees with the relevant skills, knowledge, and abilities in order to improve their performance. So again, if we are going to do an audit of training, we must establish the objective of auditing training. Or it could be on strategic alignment. So we determine the objective of conducting that strategic audit. So another element is the scope. These are the areas to be covered when we are conducting this audit. So again, as a reminder, we are going to develop a template showing these elements before we conduct the audits. So the scope are the areas to be covered or reviewed. For example, recruitment, training, compensation, and employee relations. This is a functional audit. So if you are going to do another audit, like compliance audit, you look at the scope of compliance audit. And in this case, you are looking at the various labor laws like Employment Act, the Labor Relations Act, Work Injuries and Benefits Act, among other acts or labor laws. So which areas are you going to cover when we are conducting that audit? Or if it is a risk audit, so you are going to look at the areas to be covered, like types of risks, sources of risks, mitigation measures. So that becomes our scope in the risk audit. For culture audit, the scope could cover one, the values like honesty, integrity, professionalism. And two, the practices. Practices in relation to the various activities that we perform, like compensation. What is our way of compensating people? Or employee relations. What are the key elements in employee relations in terms of values and practices? Thirdly, we establish the audit criteria and standards. These are the parameters that we shall be using when we conduct an audit. For example, if we are going to conduct a functional audit, which we are going to do, we look at the criteria for measuring or evaluating recruitment. For example, in recruitment, one of the criterion or criteria is time to hire. How much time does it take to hire employees? Or two, the quality of hires. Quality of hires relates to the ability of the new employee to perform the jobs for which they were selected efficiently and effectively. So that becomes the criteria for assessing recruitment and selection as a function of HRM. Specifically, we look at the labor laws. How are we compliant? Are there gaps in our compliance, whether it's recruitment, training, compensation, or employee relations? Then we look at the policies. In terms of policies, we are looking at 2 or 3 things. One, the existence of a policy to cover that particular area. Does it exist? 2, the adequacy of the policy. Is it comprehensive enough to provide guidelines to the employees or managers when making decisions? And 3, is it compliant with the existing labor laws? So those are again criteria when it comes to evaluation of company policies. Best practices can be established by doing benchmarking. So again, because we want to compete in the market, it's always good to benchmark with others, which we call best of class. And we borrow these best practices because they have been proved to be working. So in the best practice, we will be identifying what are these practices in relation to recruitment, training, compensation, employee relations, or any other function. So that when we borrow these best practices, we can implement them in the knowledge that we are likely to succeed if we implement them well. So again, the audit framework will indicate the criteria for evaluation. So if it is risk, we establish the criteria. If it is functional audit, we establish criteria. Strategic audit, what are we going to measure? Then another element is the methodologies and tools that we are going to collect, analyze, and interpret data or information. I have given a few of them there. For example, surveys, which are usually in the form of questionnaires. This is a tool for collecting data, whether it is quantitative or qualitative. We also establish checklists, a list of items that we are going to assess or evaluate to ensure compliance or effectiveness. For instance, when we are conducting a compliance audit, we develop a checklist of the labor laws that we must comply with. And in each of those labor laws, we create boxes with items which must be complied with. For example, a labor law like employee relations, we can create a checklist under employee relations, one of which is a contract, employment contract, that goes under employment contract. Or to disciplinary procedure. It goes under Employment Act and many others. So our checklist is important because through this checklist, we are able to easily pick out aspects that exist or do not exist. Those that exist become our strengths, which we should maintain. Those that don't exist become our gaps and indicate areas of improvement. Another tool that we use is interviews. And in the majority of cases, it's argued that interviews provide detailed information on any aspect in our HR audit. Unlike questionnaires, which is restricted to written documents, in interviews, we can go beyond what is written by asking probing questions. One, to ensure understanding, and two, to collect more information, which cannot be possible when we are using questionnaires. So an interview is important because it helps us to collect more information from the respondents. When we are conducting an audit, we may not only consult the documents, but also ask people their opinions and ideas on what exists. And that is where interviews come in handy. Another method is document reviews. What are the documents that we shall be reviewing? 1, HR policies. 2, standard operating procedures. 3, manuals. And if need be, we can be conducting a document review of the various labor laws. And then data analysis techniques. We can analyze data using 2 methodologies. 1, quantitative. These are statistical techniques such as frequencies or percentages. So if we want to establish the level of compliance in regard to recruitment and selection, we look at the number of areas that are not covered and do a calculation of the total number of compliance issues. You multiply that by 100, it will give you a percentage. Or specifically, if we are talking about compensation and look at it in regard to employee exit, we are looking at the exit rate or turnover rate. So how do we calculate turnover rate in relation to compensation? We look at the number of people who have left against the average number of people existing in the organization. You multiply that by 100 and it gives you a percentage. And this data helps us to make a decision that if the exit rate is very high, say 25%, that is very high. Ideally, we should retain 100% of our employees. But again, that is impossible because people have a right to move. But a retention rate of 85% is good enough for an organization. And efforts should be made to ensure that we continue retaining those people. Because again, we know the consequences of employee turnover. So there are those qualitative and quantitative methods that we will be talking about when we are conducting a HR audit. So in this framework, on my slide, there are 4. And then in the next slide, there are more. One of which is the audit team and the governance structure. That this process requires the combined effort of other actors. These other actors are people within and outside the HR department. So as HR auditors, we will be able to identify the team that will be conducting the audit because this is not a one-man show. So we identify auditors. I am delighted that at the end of this process, for those of us who have not done this before, we shall become pioneers of this audit process. And being pioneers, we are expected to be the evangelists of this audit process by way of sharing your insights, your knowledge, and skills in conducting the audit. Therefore, it's expected that you will be training others on how to conduct this audit. So once you have created an audit team, it becomes easy for us to assign roles. So in the assignment of roles, you will be determining who will be responsible for what, when, and how. And this is intended to ensure accountability, that in case there is a challenge, we know who to go to. So each of the members of the audit team will play different roles. And what are the roles that we are thinking about? One, designing the audit tool that we have mentioned in number 4. 2 is analyzing data out of the audit tools that we have developed. Another one is reporting. Who will be reporting the findings to the relevant authorities? So this structure must be clear on who is the team leader and the other members and the roles they will be playing. Next is the audit report, that when you have developed a framework, there is a section on audit report. What goes into this report? So again, the report must be structured in a way that is logical and meaningfully presented. meaning that we must identify the key areas that we are auditing. And that is why we mentioned earlier on the scope. The scope of audit, these are the key areas. And in the reporting, we should identify those key areas that we were auditing, giving enough details, capturing the strengths, the weaknesses, compliance status, as well as risks or gaps. So if it is a functional audit, you should be able to give details of each of the functions. For example, recruitment and selection. What are the findings? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What is the compliance status? What are the risks? Then you move on to the next one, like training and development. What did you find out, or what are your observations? What are the strengths, weaknesses, and risks? So you do for all the areas that you set out to audit, be it functional audit, strategic audit, compliance audit, or best practice audit. So the reporting is very important, and this is where, as it were, the rubber meets the road. That once we have a defective report, then even in terms of implementation of the action plans becomes very difficult. And it will have been a waste of time and resources to conduct such an exercise. The other element is the recommendations and action plan section. That in your framework, you should be having a section talking about the solutions or suggestions to improve the current status of the HR audit or functions. And as I have indicated, you provide actionable solutions. Actionable solutions are those that have the following characteristics. One, they are clear. Two, they are specific. Three, they are measurable. And four, they are time-bound. For example, if there is a lack of policy on harassment, then an actionable recommendation or solution should be develop a clear and precise policy on harassment by July 2025. So that is actionable. And who is responsible? It could be the HR manager, because you cannot have a HR officer at a lower level to develop a policy. So there should be the action itself, the person responsible, the timelines, and the area that is covered. So that is very important. You can create a matrix so as to ensure that the solutions are actionable. This matrix is in the form of a table, like the area that is a policy on harassment. Then two, the action recommended, development of a clear policy. Then the person responsible is the HR manager. What are the resources required? And lastly, the timeline, by when? And as I have indicated, July 2025. So it's an actionable solution. Do not be vague. Like it is recommended that the HR department develops a clear harassment policy. That is very vague. We need to be clear so that anybody who picks this recommendation can run with it. And these recommendations are intended to address gaps in terms of compliance or any systemic weaknesses in recruitment, training, performance management, etc. The last element is follow-up and monitoring, where we are saying that at the end of this audit process, there must be a mechanism of tracking the level and the effectiveness of implementation of the action plans that have been recommended. So specifically, we follow on one, whether we are on track in the implementation. Two, any emerging issues that may have come up. Three, challenges that may be affecting this. And four, taking corrective actions. And that is why monitoring is a continuous process, meaning that it never comes to an end. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the content of the framework that we are trying to understand. And I want to invite one or two questions so that we move on to the next part. So anybody with a question on the definition and the elements of the audit framework? I can see Yvonne. Go on. Good morning.
Thank you. That has been very clearly explained. I'm humbly requesting if you could expound on the difference between audit criteria and audit standards.
Okay. Thank you for your question, Violin. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly.
Yes, you have.
Yes. A criteria or criterion is a measurement or an aspect that you are going to measure. For example, we are looking at recruitment and selection. What criteria are we going to use to measure the success of recruitment and selection? These are the parameters. One, we look at the time to hire the employees, the time. So time becomes a criterion for measuring the success of recruitment. Two, the quality of the new hires. That becomes a measurement or criteria. Three is acceptance rate of job offers. So how many people accepted the job offers? So again, that becomes a criteria for assessing success. A standard is a rule, is a practice, or a law that regulates the way we do things. And that is why we have standard operating procedures. Those are SOPs. Talking of SOPs, we have a process of recruitment and selection. The first step is identification of vacant positions. The second step is to develop job descriptions for those positions. The third step could be seeking authorization for really filling those positions. The fourth step is advertising. The fifth is selection. Selection starts with the long list, then short list, interviews. The sixth step is a job offer. And the last, or the second last step, is onboarding. And the very last step in recruitment is monitoring the performance of the employees, which we call probation. So that becomes a standard process. So a standard is a rule or a procedure of conducting an activity, which everybody can follow so as to arrive at an outcome or an output. So criteria is a measurement, a standard is a rule or a process. I believe I'm clear, Violin, and you have got the difference.
Very clear, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question? The floor is ours so that we move on.
Morning, Mr. Andrew.
Yes, Adan, how are you today?
Thank you.
Good seeing you. Go on.
Yes, thanks for this well done presentation.
Thank you.
I have just one question, sir.
Yes.
What key component should be prioritized when designing a HR audit framework for an organization? An example. That's my first question.
And come up again. There's something I missed. Sorry to interrupt. Can you ask the question again? There's something I missed.
Yeah. So my question is, what key components should be prioritized when designing?
Continent or component? Sorry.
Component. Should be prioritized when designing an HR framework audit. That's one question. The second question is, what is your approach in balancing a compliance focus audit versus performance or strategic HR audit?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Allow me to start with the first question. What is this priority area that you are going to look at when you are establishing this framework? Let me say that the first priority is the corporate strategy and objectives. That whatever we do in HR must be aligned with the corporate strategy. That anything that is not aligned results in a strategic drift. So the first aspect that you must consider is what is the strategic direction of the organization? In various aspects, it could be in terms of revenue, it could be in terms of growth, or it could be in terms of service delivery, or ways of becoming competitive. And then you bring it down to the HR department. What are the key areas that will create a difference or contribute to the attainment of the corporate goals and strategies? And then you look at the various either functions or risks or best practices. Where are we likely to get the most results or the best results that will address the corporate strategy? So the starting point is our corporate strategies. Where are we? Where are we going? And then once you have identified the area, then you develop this framework that I have given the elements. On your second question, if you can come up again, Adam.
Sorry, I was talking to myself.
Okay, sorry.
My second question is, how do you align HR audit with internal control, for example, finance or operational audit, to avoid duplication and audit fatigue?
Okay. Yes, how do we align HR audit with the internal audit?
Right.
Two ways. One, we need to have a conversation with the internal HR audit, with the internal audit department, so that we establish their audit schedules and also align our own schedule with the internal audit schedule. So there is need for a conversation or a team effort where HR managers have a conversation with the internal audit to align their schedules, so that if the internal audit process begins in July, like this month, and goes all the way to June next year, then our internal HR audit can also be aligned with the internal audit so that there is no conflict. So there is a conversation by way of cross-functional collaboration where the internal audit works with HR auditors so that the schedules are aligned. Otherwise, if we do our own audits and then the internal auditors conduct theirs, it will result in audit fatigue. There will be so many audits which may not be helpful. Secondly, we can conduct audits by use of external auditors. These are the experts who can give us a report, particularly on the HR functions. And when you have done that, we can then align the findings with those of the internal audit. And again, this is a continuous process. You can do it internally or externally. If you do it internally as HR department, you do the functional audit like recruitment, training, performance management, which does not touch on any other audits in the organization. Once you have done that, and then have a discussion of what you have found out. But ideally, I would recommend that HR department audit team works with the internal auditors, align their audit in terms of areas of audit and to the timelines, so that we have one internal audit capturing HR and other areas in the organization like finance, production, ICT, among others. So that is how you can integrate the HR audit with the normal internal audit so as not to cause confusion. I believe I've answered your question, Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Andrew. I appreciate your time and, of course, the expertise and the examples, the valuable examples you have given.
Yes.
This will give me a few takeaways in our own HR process. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'm happy. Anybody else with a question or a comment to make, go ahead so that we move to the next part. Alice, if you are there, you can ask your question. And I'm mentioning names in no particular order.
Thank you, Mwalimu. It is crystal clear. I do not have any question at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Anne, if you are there. Anne Sangira. Felix, I can see you.
Yeah, thank you. Not much for now. Just following. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. I believe we are now clear on the elements of the audit framework. With your permission, I can move to the next part, which is types of HR auditing frameworks. There are 7 in number. I could not project them all in one slide. That's why I have picked one by one and put them on my slide. The first one is the compliance audit. This is about assessing or evaluating the level of compliance with the various local and international labor laws and standards. So in this audit, we are trying to verify or ascertain whether or not we are complying or adhering to the legal requirements of the national labor laws. Somebody may ask, what are these national labor laws? These are labor laws developed by the national government. Especially in our case, we are talking about 2 levels of government, the county government and the national government. The national government is responsible for formulating the labor laws through acts of parliament. So all the labor laws that are in operation in our country are a product of the legislative arm of government. And that's why we call them national labor laws, because they are developed by the National Assembly, and all entities, whether private or public, must comply with them. So those are national labor laws, and all of us are guided by these labor laws, which I've mentioned, albeit briefly, and with your permission, I can repeat them. 1, the Employment Act. 2, the Labor Relations Act. 3, the Labor Institutions Act. 4, Work Injuries and Benefits Act. 5, Occupational Safety and Health Act. Those are the main ones that regulate the employment relationship. So when we set out to audit compliance, we create a checklist of all those labor laws and then ascertain or verify the level of compliance with each one of them. And this can be done with the assistance of the legal department. Because as HR managers, we may not have a deep understanding of all the labor laws, because this is a specialty, and that is why we have labor relations lawyers or employee relations lawyers. But that does not preclude us from understanding these laws. So once we have developed a checklist, then we can tick the boxes on where we are compliant or where we are not. Secondly, we are talking about international standards. Our labor laws, most of them are derived from these international standards. And one of the main international standards is the ILO standard. That is International Labor Organization. And most countries around the globe derive their labor laws from ILO standards. So these ILO standards provide the framework of developing labor laws because they are applied internationally. And this International Labor Organization protocols enable member countries to formulate their labor laws for purposes of standardization. And then we also need to ensure compliance with our internal policies. All activities related to the functions of HR are regulated by policies. So there are policies in all the functions, and there is no exception. Policies related to recruitment and selection. So there must be a recruitment and selection policy, which provides us guidelines on what should be done, when, where, how, and by who. Secondly, there should be a policy on training and development, talking about the policy itself, the purpose of the policy, the scope of the policy, and the processes of conducting training. There are other policy areas like performance management and appraisal. So there should be guidelines on what to do, when, and where. Other policy areas are like recruitment, rather not health and safety, employee relations, discipline, among others. So in this framework of compliance audit, there are several components that we look at. One is the legal like Employment Act, and then the labor codes. Labor codes are rules and regulations that govern the employment relationship. For example, disciplinary, employment contracts, termination of the contracts, among others. These are the labor codes that are regulations or rules. We could also have a checklist on data protection under the Data Protection Act. So what type of data do we have? Where is it stored? Who is in charge of this data protection? A report or an audit of data protection. What are the measures that you have put in place? Otherwise, if you don't have this report presented on an annual basis to the office of ODPC, that becomes an issue, becomes a compliance issue. ODPC's Office of the Data Protection Commission. And then we also look at internal policies which govern the various functions like recruitment, training, performance management, health and safety. So one key component in this compliance audit framework is a checklist. Do we have a checklist of all the labor laws? Then secondly is regulatory compliance matrix. This is in the form of a table, as I said, identifying the policies and mapping them against the legal requirements. For example, a policy on dismissal. That if there is a disciplinary policy, what are the legal requirements for that policy to be compliant? The disciplinary committees. 3 is disciplinary actions. And 4, whether these disciplinary actions are monitored on a regular basis, because if they continue on for a long time, then it becomes a problem to the organization. So in each
Mwalimu, you are cutting off, or am I the only one?
organizations lose cases in court is lack of documentary evidence. And that is why we are advised that in everything that we do, let there be proper documentation. Whether it is recruitment, there must be a documentary evidence. And what are the documents that we can keep in recruitment? One is the advertisement. 2 is the list of panelists. 3 are the scores for the various candidates, so that if there is a dispute, we can always go back to it. 4 is a recruitment and selection report prepared at the end of the onboarding process. All these provide evidence and can be referred to in case there are issues or there is a need to consult this document. In training, we have several documents like training needs analysis report. 2, we have training evaluation report. All this help us to monitor the effectiveness of our activities. And this form part of our knowledge repository, which we can be using from time to time when we conduct those activities. So in a nutshell, we may have documents related to contracts. And as I mentioned earlier, contracts could be permanent, part-time, casual, and internship. 2, leave records, various types of leave, like annual leave, maternity leave, sick leave, and other leave like study leave. Termination files, these are very important, that if anybody has a dispute about the reasons for termination, we can refer to these records internally, or if they are required by a court of law, we can always present them. Because lack of these files are part of the gaps that we should be identifying in this HR audit framework. And then lastly, I remember yesterday, those of us who are with us, we talked about a key concept called audit trail. This is evidence of approvals, communication, compliance records. Sorry. That we can track any process using this trail. That if it is recruitment, there is a first step, like requisitioning of the vacant position. That becomes evidence. Then approval, that the requisitions have been approved. 3, then advertisements. It can show when and where we did the advertisements. And for shortlisting, we also have a shortlist of the potential candidates. So in compliance audit framework, we are looking at those 4 critical aspects. That is a checklist of the laws, labor codes, data protection and internal policies. 2, regulatory compliance, where we are looking at the policies against the legal requirements. 3, the documents. And 4, the audit trail as a procedure or as a process. Without this, it becomes very hard to conduct a compliance audit. Then we also have the corrective actions, where we have a register of the actions recommended. If it is recruitment and selection, what was recommended? Who was to implement the recommendation? When and how? If there are any resources that were required, and that is very important. As we will notice later in this program this morning, we will be identifying corrective action plan. That once we have identified corrective actions, and then we develop an action plan. This action plan identifies or gives a list of all the actions in all the areas of audit. Then 2, the persons responsible for those actions. 3, the timelines for those actions. And 4, the resources required to actualize the action plans. So again, when we are doing a compliance audit, we look at corrective actions, which are in the form of a register. That becomes important for quick reference. So those are that is the first type of HR audit framework, which is the compliance audit. The second framework is the best practice. Best practices are usually identified by way of benchmarking. And the benchmarking is a comparison between our organizations and other organizations out there in the market. And again, as a rider, that these benchmarks cannot be done with any organization. It must be in the same industry, conducting similar businesses. And this is important because when you go to conduct audits, like you are in a hospital and you want to benchmark with an agricultural organization, those are different industries. And whatever practices exist in those industries may not be the same. Or you are conducting a benchmark between a training institution, like a university, with a local government entity, like a county government, and particularly city councils. There are certain practices that may be different with our practices. Why? Allow me to give an example. Women are not allowed to go into sewage lines in city councils or city governments. Why? It is because of the nature of work that they have to do, which could be detrimental to the ladies. For some, this may appear to be discriminatory because the law says to be discriminated against on account of their gender. So why are women prohibited from entering sewage lines? Because of their biological makeup. It may appear to be discrimination, but that is the rule. So when you are conducting benchmarks, you must benchmark with similar organizations. So if it is a city county, like county of Nairobi can benchmark with county of Mombasa, county of Garissa, or county of Kakamega, because they have similar functions. So what are the components to be assessed in best practices? One is the benchmarking tools. Where we are talking about the tools for comparing our organizations with others, for example, of observation checklists or interview checklists or questionnaires, so that when we go out there to compare ourselves, we have a set of questions or a list of observations that we are going to identify and then borrow those best practices. So what are we going to compare ourselves with? One is recruitment and selection. 2, training and development. 3, performance management. 4, health and safety. And lastly, retention. So what are the practices that are working for them in each of those functions? If we are conducting a risk audit, again, you look at how they manage their risks so that we can borrow those best practices in risk management. Secondly, as a component of best practice is gap analysis. What are the gaps that you have identified? Gaps in recruitment, gaps in training, gaps in performance management. So those gaps are related to our organization, not their organization. Our organization, when we compare, what are the gaps that exist in our own policies, in our own practices, or in our own systems? Those are the targets for improvement. And that is where we borrow best practices from, based on those gaps that other organizations are better than us. Thirdly is the comparison matrix. What have you found out? Just like you do a SWOT analysis in business, where you are identifying internal strengths and weaknesses and external opportunities and threats. So if you are a startup, you want to start a new business, you conduct a SWOT analysis. That's a good practice. So this analysis will give us the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We are comparing ourselves in terms of our HR functions, which I've mentioned. So what are we going to look at in terms of performance? One are our current KPIs. KPIs related to recruitment. And one of the KPIs in recruitment is the time to hire or quality of hires. And then we compare that with what is obtaining in the organization with which we are benchmarking. So what are their KPIs related to recruitment? So if the time to hire is shorter in their organization, then we compare that with ours, which could be longer, and find out why is theirs shorter and ours longer. Because the longer we take, the likelihood of losing those potential candidates. You can imagine you have advertised a position today. It takes 3 or 4 months to shortlist and interview people. And by the time you call them for job offers, they have already joined other organizations and they can't come. So when we take a long time compared to the other organizations, then we'll risk losing those high value candidates. And that's why we are using KPIs to compare ourselves with other organizations in the industry. The other component is data obtaining in the industry. and comparing that data with what we have. What are the industry reports? And where can you get these industry reports? Some of these can be found in the National Bureau of Statistics or with our Association of Employers, that is the Federation of Kenyan Employers. They have some of the reports which we could be using to benchmark so that we can obtain best practices. We only need to make a request, and the reason why we are making this request for purposes of establishing best practices which we can borrow. The last aspect on best practice is adoption. We identify those best practices which we can implement in our organizations. And those best practices relate to all the areas of audit, whether it's functional audit, strategic audit, compliance audit, or even risk audit. And the key word there is alignment. Align those best practices with what is practically possible in our organizations. Because there is no point of borrowing all the best practices and implementing them wholesomely without considering the capacity of the organization to adopt those practices. So we should not exceed those best practices. The answer is yes or no. If you have capacity, yes, you can exceed because you can do better than the competition. But if you do not have the capacity, you can only implement what you possibly can. So those are the key areas or components related to best practice audit framework. Remember, best practice is about comparing ourselves with the best of class in the industry. So we use tools for comparison, we identify gaps, we develop comparison matrices, and conduct internal data surveys, external data surveys, and we develop an adaptation plan. What are the best practices that we can get, and what is our capacity to implement those best practices? Another framework is the strategic audit framework. As I indicated, and based on the question that Adan asked, we said that the starting point of our audit is the strategic audit. What is our strategic direction in terms of vision, goals, and performance objectives? The vision is where an organization wants to be. And then you cascade that down to the HR function and look at recruitment, training, performance management. How can we help the organization to achieve that vision? So in terms of goals, what do we want to achieve? If it's revenue growth, we want to achieve a revenue growth of 10% in the next financial year. Then again, we go back to HR function. Look at recruitment, training, performance. With the current status of those functions, are we able to achieve those goals? And lastly is performance objectives. Where does the organization wish to be vis-a-vis the competitors? So what are the key components that we will be auditing or assessing in this strategic audit? One is alignment. Do the HR functions connect or align to the corporate objectives? Just like when we conduct training, we do a training needs analysis. This analysis will identify performance gaps. These performance gaps can be looked at 4 levels. One, the individual level. 2, group level, 3, departmental level, and 4, organizational level. So at the organizational level, we are looking at how training can help to achieve the vision and the goals of the organization. So if it doesn't, then we have to panel beat our training programs to ensure that they are aligned with those corporate goals. So strategic alignment is very important. Otherwise, we might be working at cross purpose that we are pulling apart in all the departments. So Department A, like finance, might be working on their own programs. HR works on their own, and we end up not achieving organizational objectives, vision, and goals. The second component of strategic audit is workforce planning review. This is basically a human resource plan, which will provide us with a projection into the future with regard to the numbers and the quality of people we are likely to have in the future, and also the environmental factors that will affect our plans. So a human resource plan will look at several things. One, the corporate objectives. Where are we going? 2, the demand for labor. What kind of quality or number of people that we are likely to require? 3, the supply. Supply is the number of people who are already in our organizations. But if you are a new organization, you don't have the staff complement, and therefore you recruit. But for existing organization, you establish supply. This is the in-post. How many people do we have in which departments? Another element of the workforce plan is the plan itself. By comparing demand and supply, we will identify several gaps or opportunities. Where there is a deficit, we prepare recruitment and selection. Where there is a surplus, we prepare redundancy and retrenchment plans. Where there is an equilibrium, meaning that you have enough, meaning supply and demand are equal, we prepare retention plans. So basically, when we are looking at a strategic audit in terms of workforce planning, we look at talent pipelines. Are there people who are adequately prepared to take over senior positions? And in terms of succession plans, we are looking at 2 or 3 things. 1, training. 2, promotion. And 3, mentorship and coaching. This enables us to prepare succession plans for different departments in our organizations. And then the element of strategic staffing, that we hire people to occupy key positions. And these people must have the right skills, the right knowledge, the right experience, and the right abilities. A workforce plan is a very important tool that will help us to audit our strategies. Another element is the SWOT and the PESTEL analysis. I've already mentioned the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which is a strategic tool to enable us to identify internal strengths and weaknesses in terms of human resources, or external opportunities and threats, where we are looking at the legal environment, the technological environment, which provide those opportunities. So for PESTEL, we are looking at the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and ecological. Allow me to talk briefly about the political environment, where we talk about two key things. One is political stability of a country, and two, the decisions that are made by the political leaders and their influence. Where there is political instability, the likelihood of hiring new employees is very low, or even training. We are likely to freeze most of the processes because of an unstable political environment. A case in point is where there are protests in any country, and these protests disrupt businesses. And again, if the businesses are disrupted, it means that it affects the performance of the employees. So that when employees fail to achieve their targets, it can be attributed to the prolonged protests, which is a political environment. And we make provisions for that because that is beyond the control of managers. So we look at external and internal factors that can influence the decisions that we make in relation to training, performance management, recruitment and selection, etc. The other element is HR strategic KPIs. These are measurements that we use in HR that will help us to align with the corporate mission, vision, and goals. So what is our contribution? We look, for example, at return on investment in our talent. For example, we are training as part of talent management. We must get returns on investment from this training. And what are the returns? Reduced expenditure if there was wastage. 2, increased revenue if the revenues were low. 3, increased number of customers because the employees have now the skills and knowledge to attract new customers. And also retention of top talent. These are the people who bring high value to the organization. So as HR managers, we are looking at the return on investment in our talent and also the retention rate. Those become our KPIs, our measurements, key performance indicator. How many people have we retained? Though it is not the specific role of HR managers to retain all employees, the working condition might be different, the relationship might be toxic, but we have a key role to play in the retention of staff. The last element on strategic audit is leadership interview guides, where we are trying to establish or identify the mindsets of our leaders in all departments, whether it's HR, finance, marketing, IT, or communications, depending on the size of your organization. Why are we looking at the perceptions of the leaders? It is because the tone, behavior, and the direction of an organization is determined by the top management. So we need to seek their commitment to the attainment of HR objectives. So we have an interview guide where we are assessing the attitudes, the commitment of the senior managers. I believe we have had or witnessed managers who are not willing to support their employees in terms of mentorship, coaching, and resource allocation. That becomes difficult even when we are conducting HR audits. And for that reason, we need to have a discussion with our managers so that we have their standpoint in relation to the various audits that we are conducting. Functional audit, this is specific to HR. We are talking about HR functions like recruitment, training, performance, and others. What are we looking at? Efficiency, effectiveness, and compliance with the policies, labor laws, and the industry standards. So how compliant are all those practices with the labor laws? So what do we look at in terms of components? One, functional checklist. We look at recruitment or hiring processes, which are protocols. We also look at payroll cycle, accuracy. Payroll is very key. That's why I've highlighted it, because it can affect the performance and motivation of employees if it's not done well. So a payroll cycle is where we start preparing the payroll. It could be weekly, monthly, rather, we say every 2 weeks or monthly. So depending on your cycle, we must start preparing early so that we ensure accuracy in this. So we look at the pay levels of all the employees. We look at the statutory deductions. We look at the variable deductions. We also look at the overtime payments and calculations. All these go into the payroll cycle accuracy, because many of the complaints that we receive relate to unfair deductions or inaccurate payment of our employees, which can be really demoralizing. So we have a functional checklist in recruitment, in training, in performance management, or compensation. Then we develop a flow diagram to visualize how things move or the activities that we have to perform. Like in recruitment, where do we begin? We might have a flow diagram, like the starting point is the requisition. After that, we authorization. After that, we advertise. After that, we interview. After that, we offer jobs. After that, we do onboarding. After that, we also do probation. And after that, we identify new jobs which may be emerging, and the process begins. That's a flow diagram which helps us to visualize the activities that have to be conducted in all the areas that we intend to audit. Thirdly is the KPIs. What are the measurements that we are going to use in recruitment, in training, and in performance management? And I've given a few of them. One is time to hire, especially in a technological environment or space in which we operate. The time to hire should not be more than 45 days. But again, I am aware and alive to different setups, particularly in government. Government hires take longer, as long as 3 months, 4 months, or in some cases 6 months. It's because of the procedures that have to be followed, especially in regard to procurement. That for a vacant position to be filled, there must be, for example, an advertisement which will run for 21 days. But if it was in private sector, you put it on your website or social media, and within a week, we have the right number, which we can shortlist and conduct interviews, and within 45 days, we already have a replacement or a new hire. So the time to hire should not take very long if you want to do well in recruitment and selection. In training, there are those returns on investment, like reduced waste, improved performance, and also improved retention. For appraisal completion rate, we are looking at the number of employees who have been assessed or evaluated completely, that there are no gaps in the appraisal forms. Sometimes the completion rate is low. Why? Because of changed priorities in our systems or changes in our environment, which means that we cannot complete the appraisals because of those changes. And lastly, under functional audit framework, we look at the role and responsibility matrices. And this looks at the duties and responsibilities of the audit team. So who is responsible for what in each of the functions and where? So these responsibilities help us to identify the people who are accountable for the various functions. If it's employee relations, we know who is accountable. If it's training, we may have an L&D department, so we should go to L&D. If it is recruitment, we go to staffing or hiring department. So basically, those are the key aspects that are captured in the functional area in terms of audit framework. Down there, I've given process documentation, and I mentioned it earlier, that everything must be documented. All functions must be documented, whether in terms of manuals, in terms of forms to be filled, like application forms, or standard operating procedures. Next is the risk management framework, where we are looking at how we are going to reduce the various risks that may arise when conducting all the HR functions. What are the key components to look at in terms of risks? One is the risk register. If you want to be successful in managing risk, you must have a risk register, meaning that you have a checklist of all the possible risks that may arise in the organization and their potential effects or impact. For example, in recruitment, you identify a risk like recruiting the wrong person. So you assess the likelihood. What is the likelihood of hiring the wrong person? And then you look at the impact. What will happen if we hire the wrong person? You can imagine you have hired the wrong person in a factory where goods are being produced. This person does not have the right skills and knowledge. And then you assign him or her to handle a machine. The impact is very high compared to a person who is hired to clean a place. The impact is lower in cleaning compared to the impact in production. So you must have a checklist of all the risks. Secondly, you develop a risk heat map where you look at the likelihood and the impact of the organization. Under the likelihood, you say very likely or very unlikely. Under impact, you say the impact is very high or very low or negligible. So that based on these two parameters, you prioritize. If the likelihood is very high and the impact is very high, that becomes your first priority. Like in the example I've given, where you are hiring the wrong person, and it's likely that you hire the wrong person, and the impact is breakage of machines or even death, that becomes your first priority. So when you prioritize this, what do you need to do? You identify mitigation measures before they happen so that you reduce the likelihood. So how do we reduce the likelihood of hiring a wrong person? Train the panelists so that we have the right person. Two, look at the criteria for selection. They must be crystal clear. Otherwise, we might bring on board the wrong person. Four, deployment of technology so that we do not make human mistakes. So that is a risk map where we are looking at the likelihood, whether it is very high, and impact. Likelihood is very, very likely, or impact is very high, and then prioritize. For internal control checklist, we are looking at the safeguards that we have put in place to ensure that those risks do not happen in the first place. So what are the controls that we put in place, for example, when it comes to health and safety? One is to provide PPEs and checks. How do we ensure that people wear their PPEs? There must be a supervisor, and there must be a daily check that all the people wear their PPEs. Then we also have an incident log where we are recording all the incidences that happen in the organization. If it's an accident, for example, it must be recorded. What type of accident it was, where it happened, who was involved, and what actions were taken. Then lastly is the mitigation action plans. How do we reduce the impact, especially high risk areas like health and safety? So ladies and gentlemen, those are the elements or components associated with the risk management framework. Second last is safety and the wellness, which relates to health and safety. And we are saying that our employees must be physically, emotionally, and psychologically safe. What components do we look at? The compliance checklist, which involves fire safety, that we have, for example, warning signs in case of fire, fire exits, or fire extinguishers. They must all be there. There are various types of fire extinguishers, which could be water-based extinguishers, powder, or foam, depending on the type of fire. And the employees should be trained on this. PPE usage, that is protective equipment like overalls, gumboots, gloves, and helmets. They must be used properly. Emergency protocols, this is in case of emergency, do we have assembly points? Do we have emergency exits? Do we have drills on emergency? And what happens after the drills? The second component is records in relation to health, occupational health. We must keep records, as it were, because records always help us to defend ourselves in case of a legal suit. The other one is wellness program review, where we are talking about the psychological, mental, and physical health of the employees. Our employees must be healthy. So this framework, in terms of safety, we look at programs that have been put in place to ensure that our employees are mentally, physically, and emotionally healthy. The second last aspect is feedback, that in a health and safety environment, we must have feedback. Feedback on how well we are doing in terms of compliance. 2, feedback on the actions that have been taken to mitigate illnesses and accidents. And 3, feedbacks on the effectiveness of our action plans. Lastly is the incident reporting resolution, where the reports are consolidated to find it and then presented to the relevant authorities or kept for future use. So again, reporting has a format, just like we will have a format in this HR audit. What are the steps in designing HR audit framework. I've given 10, one of which is the purpose of the framework. So as you set out to identify all the 6 frameworks, you determine the purpose. Why, for example, a compliance framework, or a functional framework, or a risk framework? Secondly, look at the scope. What are you going to cover in this framework? And as I have indicated, these are the areas to be evaluated or audited. If it's a functional audit, you look at areas like recruitment, training, performance management, etc. The third aspect or step is set clear audit objectives, and the acronym SMART is key. Objectives must be SMART, meaning specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. The other step after the objectives is to establish the methodology you are going to use to collect both quantitative and qualitative data. So you can use questionnaires, interviews, or document reviews. Step 5 is the criteria for evaluation. And I think it is Violin who asked the question, what is the difference between criteria and standard? So the criteria is the metric for measurement, where we are talking about KPIs, which could be quantitative or qualitative, and how we are going to score this. Scoring is based on the weighting of the various components. For example, in an interview, there are certain aspects that we score. For example, knowledge of the job to be done. We score that highly. And then other aspects, depending on the weight, we can give 2 or 3 marks when it comes to dressing or even confidence. Then step 6, how are we going to report this HR audit? So the reporting format and structure is very key, and that's why we are developing this framework. I said at the beginning that a framework is a structured way of doing things. It's a model, it's a guide. So in HR audit, we must develop a format. This format, as I will indicate towards the end of tomorrow, it has an executive summary, it has terms of reference, it has findings and observations, it has recommendations, and it also has monitoring and evaluation. So basically that is the structure. Step 7 is to assign roles. Who will be responsible for whatever we are going to do? For example, designing the tools. Others could be responsible for conducting the study or audit, and others could be responsible for preparing the report. Then after that, we pilot test the framework. This framework that we shall have developed, we test it. One of the ways of ensuring validity and reliability of any tool is to pilot it in terms of content, in terms of structure, and in terms of potential outcomes. So we test this. Any system, even if it's a computer system, we test it first. When you don't pilot test it, then you don't know the possible outcomes. Second last is implement the framework. And this is the structure we are going to follow, the one that I indicated. What are the elements of this framework? That is what we are going to implement. And then lastly, we monitor, review, and update the framework. I had indicated that auditing is a continuous process, and therefore we should always allow for adaptation to changes in our environment. And that can only happen if we review this framework on a regular basis, perhaps annually, so that we continuously improve. What are the features of a successful audit framework? There are several. One is comprehensiveness, meaning that it must be detailed enough. Like in the case I've given, I had given the 10 key elements of an audit framework. It must be comprehensive. Allow me to go back to the elements that I had mentioned so that you see how comprehensive it is, and that it is a requirement for purposes of clarity and for purpose of ensuring that we don't leave anything out. These are the key elements. One, the audit objectives, scope of the audit, criteria, methodology, audit team, audit report, recommendations, and lastly, follow-up. That is how detailed it should be. And that is important for us because the more detailed we are, the better for us. Otherwise, if it's not detailed, then understanding becomes difficult. Secondly, is the legal and policy compliance, that our framework, whether it is compliance framework or functional framework or risk framework, it should be guided by policy so that we align ourselves with the national labor laws, which I said govern all employers in a country. Thirdly is alignment with our strategies, and I've talked about this. All the framework we are going to use in, excuse me, in auditing must be aligned with the mission. The mission is the purpose of existence of an organization. So why do we exist? HR managers must help to achieve this mission. If the mission is to provide quality health services, then HR managers must contribute to that mission, provision of quality health services. The vision, I said, is an aspiration of the organization. That is the position or status that an organization wants to occupy in the future, 3, 5, 10 years. And then the long-term goals. That whatever framework we choose, it must be aligned with the mission, vision, and strategic objectives. The other feature is must be data-driven, that everything that we do and the decisions that we make must be based on data. In this HR audit, we will collect all types of data related to the functions that we perform, recruitment, training, performance management, and others. So that when we make a decision like promotion, it is based on data. Which data do we need? Data related to the training of the employee, and 2, data related to their performance, so that we promote people who are skilled and are high performance. The other feature or characteristic is risk identification. We have talked about risk framework, and this is important that in all the functions that we perform, there are risks. So we must identify risks clearly, prioritize those risks, implement them, and monitor. The other feature is stakeholder engagement. Even in our national government, it's a constitutional requirement that the stakeholders are engaged, both internal and external. So the citizens of our country are involved, for example, in the change of a law. Even in our own organizations, the stakeholders are many, and I've mentioned a few of them, the leadership, the managers, and employees. They should participate in this process of HR audit. Why? In order to create ownership and that everybody plays a role in this process. The other aspect which makes it effective is clear documentation, that we must document every step of the HR audit so that we can always go back to the documents and also prepare a report that will clearly present our findings. And lastly is integration with other audits. I remember Adan mentioned at what point do we align ourselves with the internal audit. And I mentioned that it is good for us to work together with the internal audit department from the beginning so that we work together as a team and we move forward. So this audit process must be integrated with other audits. It could be internal audit or external audit. For those of us in public sector, external auditors are usually the OAG, that is Office of the Auditor General. They make annual visits to assess what we are doing. And when we have worked together with our internal audit department, we should not worry when the Office of the Auditor General comes knocking. Without working together with other teams, then it becomes difficult to align ourselves with the strategic objectives of the organization. The other one is continuous improvement, that audits are not a one-off thing, they are continuous. Continuous because we shall have developed a schedule of when and how we will be conducting the HR audits. We can conduct audits quarterly, half yearly, or biannually, or annually. The reason why we do this on a regular basis is to ensure continuous improvement. And this regular audits helps us to identify gaps and set clear and actionable solutions so that we can continuously improve. What are the benefits of using HR audit frameworks? There are quite a number of benefits that we derive from using a framework or a structured way of auditing. One, it ensures legal compliance, that if we do this right, all the audits that we shall do will be in compliance. Secondly, it enhances strategic decision, meaning it contributes to the attainment of the mission, vision, and objectives of the organization. The other benefit is that it identifies risks, which we have already mentioned under risk framework, and areas of improvement. We are concerned about risks because the risks that exist in our organizations make us vulnerable. Vulnerable because it can harm our functioning. So for that reason, we need to identify risks and take or identify mitigation measures. If you go back to what we discussed under risk audit framework, we said that we must develop a risk register. Secondly, we develop heat maps where we are identifying the likelihood and the impact of the risks. And after that, we make choices based on the priority areas to mitigate the risks. The other benefit is to promote transparency and accountability. That when we audit, we reveal weaknesses. We reveal gaps. And this is in the spirit of transparency, that there is nothing to hide. Because if you hide a weakness, sooner or later, it will catch up with us, and the consequences might be dire. And being accountable is that we are responsible for the activities we conduct as HR managers and the outcomes. We are accountable for ensuring that there is efficiency and effectiveness in the policies, in the practices, and in the systems that we engage. And for that reason, we need to demarcate clearly the roles of the employees, their responsibilities, and open the HR department for scrutiny or to scrutiny. If we scrutinize ourselves, either internally or externally, then we are transparent and we are being accountable that whatever gaps exist, we take responsibility. The other benefit is that it strengthens the effectiveness of HR performance. That, for example, when we conduct a functional audit framework, we identify gaps in all the functions and take measures to improve. So particularly in terms of strengths or strengthening the effectiveness of HR, we are looking at improving the impact of HR in the organization. Why some organizations think that HR is not adding value is because we do not create impact. But by auditing HR function, we are able to justify our existence because our absence might affect the organization negatively. We also strengthen our talent management by way of attracting or hiring, utilizing or maintaining, as well as retaining. So we attract, maintain, and retain talent. And that is talent management. And lastly, when we conduct HR audits using those different frameworks, we strengthen the overall organizational productivity. That an organization is likely to use its resources efficiently and effectively to produce desirable outcomes, such as increased revenue, increased profits, customer growth and retention, as well as competitiveness. We also need to talk about flexibility in terms of the frameworks. These frameworks must be flexible, meaning that they should adapt to changes in our environment. Scalability means that they are able to adapt or handle increased demand or size or complexity. A framework like compliance, it should be scalable. Scalable meaning that we should be able to add compliance elements when need arises. And also should help us to simplify the complexity around us. Like I said at the beginning, that we operate in a complex environment and our legal and the compliance system has become very complex because there are so many intricacies and interconnections. So with this in mind, we must make our frameworks scalable, meaning that they are able to adapt and handle increased demand and complexity. How do we make this scalable and flexible? We use a modular approach that we break down the audits into specific units. For example, we are talking about recruitment. That's a module. We focus on recruitment at one go and then move to another one, training and development. Instead of mixing all of them, that means that we become disorganized, and that is not the intention of an audit framework. Two, we standardize tools. So this standardization ensures continuity and ensures reliability, because if we use non-standard tools, it means that we are going to have variable outcomes. So we must have standard tools like a checklist. Remember, I mentioned something like a legal or checklist where we are identifying all the laws and ticking the boxes where we are compliant. And then again, we use digital solutions like document management systems, human resource information systems, learning management systems, as well as cloud computing. I've given an example there, human resource information system as a digital solution, that when we are conducting HR audits, we might have a component like a dashboard, if not a dashboard, a portal within HRIS where people can be posting their responses in relation to this audit. And again, we say they should be flexible, scalable data collection methods. And one of them is SurveyMonkey. This is a digital tool which helps us, it's by Google, which helps us to collect data in a way that is flexible. You can use it many times and you can add as many questions as possible. And the other way of making it adaptable is to ensure that we prioritize the risks, just like we mentioned, in terms of likelihood and impact. So we prioritize all the risks. The other way in which we can improve this is regular reviews, because as I mentioned, one of the characteristics of an effective framework is continuous improvement. So these regular reviews ensures that there is continuous improvement. Going back to what Eden asked, cross-functional involvement, that as HR managers, we must involve other functions like finance, audit, and ICT, so that we work together. Unfortunately, some organizations work in silos, where HR works on its own, finance the same, which becomes difficult to share knowledge. We want to create an open enterprise where departmental heads and employees work together and are willing, ready, and available to share information, to share data, or any insights. On tiered reporting, we must identify the levels of reporting from the lowest to the highest level, so that in terms of content, we know which level requires which type of content. Probably a lower level reporting could provide more detailed content, but at higher level, because of the nature of the work they do, it could be summarized like an executive summary, so that it gives a helicopter view of what the audit has been about. And then lastly, we are looking at cloud-based storage, and one of them is Google Drive, where we are storing our data in the clouds so that we ensure data security. And lastly is training and capacity building, equipping our employees with the relevant skills and knowledge to conduct the audits. Otherwise, if we don't have skilled and knowledgeable people, we run the risk of not achieving the audit objectives. How do we build capacity? Through workshops, through seminars, through conferences, or through formal training. There are many challenges that may face us when conducting these audits. One, resistance, which is very common when we are introducing something new. Two, it is time consuming. This process is not likely to take 1 day or 2 days. it will take a month or so. 3 is documentation, which takes also time, and the data accuracy. Sometimes people fear to provide accurate data, and that's why we end up with data inaccuracy. And again, sensitivity of information. Some people fear being exposed, that they are being incompetent. We should not fear of exposure, because the audit, as we said, is to verify what exists. And to verify means to uncover some sensitive or controversial findings. This should not become a threat to us, but learning points. We learn from our mistakes. Those are lessons learned if there are gaps or weaknesses in our systems. And lastly, lack of top management support in terms of resources, in terms of their own time and personal involvement. How do we make this successful? One is leadership commitment, who provided the resources. 2, clear communication, that as we start this process, we provide all the relevant information. And this can only happen when we involve all the stakeholders. 3, we train all the internal teams, like I've indicated in the framework, in the elements of the framework, is the establishment of the audit team. This audit team must be trained for this audit process to be successful. And we also set realistic timelines. Remember, I said one of the tools of conducting a HR audit is SWOT analysis and SMART objectives. SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. Timelines are very important. Set realistic timelines. That this, for example, this audit is not going to take 1 week, because of the need to design the audit tool, collect data, analyze the data, and present a report. That is going to take possibly a month or so. So to be realistic, consider all the activities to be done and the workloads of people so that they don't stop performing their activities and focus on the audit only. There must be a balance between the audit and what the employees are set to achieve in terms of their individual targets and KPIs. And lastly is consistent monitoring, that this is a continuous process so that we make continuous improvement. So ladies and gentlemen, that is what I had for you this morning in terms of designing a HR audit framework or frameworks. We have looked at what a framework is, elements of an audit framework, characteristics of an effective framework, and lastly, how we can overcome the challenges that may arise during the HR audit. So I will invite all of us to ask the questions that we may have or make our comments so that we can close.
Mr. Andrew.
Yes, Adam, go on. You are the first one. Adam, go on.
Thank you. Sorry about the gentleman. I'm really fearing for you. I hope you have a biological break or take a cup of water.
Yes,
that
I
is
will.
one.
I will.
So my question, Mr. Andrews, is that first, thank you so much again. My question is,
Yes.
how do you audit sensitive records like disciplinary actions or grievances resolution without breaching confidentiality?
2 ways. One, the auditors must sign a confidentiality clause as a first requirement, that anything that we are going to audit must be guided by confidentiality. Just like we consultants go out there to audit organizations, we must sign a confidentiality clause or form where we agree to be bound by the rules and regulations governing confidentiality. That at no time can we or should we divulge confidential information to third parties. And then secondly, our audit should also be governed by the Data Protection Act. I believe in our organizations, we have a data protection office where all sensitive data is kept related to the employees. So as we conduct this audit, we should be alive to the confidentiality of information or sensitivity of information like disciplinary. So to answer your question, I've said two things. One, the auditors must sign a confidentiality clause. And two, the auditors must adhere to the Data Protection Act. I believe I've answered your question.
Yes, Mr. Audrey, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anyone else with a question or a comment to make?
I wanted to ask.
Good morning, sir.
Lele, okay. Lele, go on.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive session we've had. Although I've come in late, I don't know, how can I get the full material of today's lesson?
Immediately we finish this lesson, and our coordinator, Mr. Dan, will guide us that if you log into your portal, you should be able to get this lesson both in video and in slide form. So immediately we finish, it should be able to be available.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Yes. Jonathan, you can go on.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned type of auditing frameworks to be 7, but I think you displayed 6. I don't know if I missed the 7th one.
Okay. The 7th one could be a health and safety audit, if I didn't capture that. Let me go back a bit and see if I had missed out on anything. There's the risk audit, safety and health. The last one is the cultural audit framework, cultural audit. And that should be reflected in the next presentation. Okay, Jonathan, I guess we are on the same page.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So if there is no further question or comment, I wish to, yes.
Good morning, everyone.
Yes, Dan, go on.
Yes, my name is Dan, CHLP, Dan PN Gadito. I can stop sharing, Mr. Undari.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. And I suggest for those who are present who will be getting certificates, can you put your video on? I want to do a roll call to see whether you are there or you just logged in and disappeared. We use very comprehensive tools to take and check on attendance and participation.
Hello. Jambo. Das adressiert.
Hello, Christine. That's why.
Hello, this is Jonathan.
Hello, Christine. That's why.
Oh, somebody else is on. Second. Hello, Alice Mayaka.
Hello. Judy Mwaniki.
Mbona hajapiga picha?
I want to suggest that I do this in the afternoon session, because I guess the internet is misbehaving and it's kicking me out every other minute. So let's do this in the afternoon so that we don't take much time. Jude, I apologize for that. Alicia Waderi, thank you for being there. And everybody, Christine, Leroy, at least I hope you are able to log into your account eventually.
Not yet.
Yeah, I hope so. So in the afternoon, let's have another meeting, then we'll be able to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.